Celtic mythology is truly ancient. The word Celt, hard sea, was coined by the ancient Greeks, Keltos, and used by the first scholars of their history, with the soft sea, Celtic, a later approximation adopted, most obviously, by sports teams in Glasgow and Boston. While we use the original, the soft sea pronunciation is not wrong in the way that Scottish Gaelic names are often mistakenly anglicised. It's just an alternative. The Celts originated from Austria and Switzerland around the 1st century of the Common Era, spreading west across Europe into Britain and Ireland, where Gaelic history began. It should be noted that Celtic peoples did not consider themselves Celtic, or indeed Gaels. These are retroactive terms used by scholars. As mentioned, Gaelic mythology originated among the Gaels of Ireland. The word Gael itself comes from Gael Glass, the founder of Gaelic languages according to the Irish pseudo-historical tome the Borga Bela, or Book of Invasions. When the Irish Celts migrated to Scotland in the 6th century and possibly before, their Irish mythology went with them. This is why some tales have Fionn and the Féinn living in Scotland, hence Scornam Fianna, while the majority place him firmly in Ireland. Just to recap, Gaelic mythology is distinct from, but heavily overlaps with, the broader Celtic mythology. The Gaelic legendarium comprises the mythological, the Ulster or Yule, Fionn or Ossianic, and the King's cycles. The Fianna, the original form of Féinn, were first known as the Leinster Fianna, part of the clan Bisna. They fought with the Connacht Fianna and the clan Morna, eventually uniting to form the Fianna Eireann, with Fionn MacCumhaill as their chief. Membership of the Fianna was exclusive, but not hereditary. Aspiring members had to undertake gruelling challenges and initiation ordeals requiring tremendous skill and dexterity. According to the Dictionary of Celtic Mythology, perceptions about the nature of an early Irish Fianna have shifted widely since the beginning of Celtic studies in the mid-19th century. These range from being chivalrous benefactors, i.e. Gaelic equivalents of the Knights of the Round Table or of the Samurai, to being parasitic marauders like the warlords of pre-Maoist China. Heroic and romantic portrayals of the Fianna began in Anglo-Irish and English literature around 1800, under the popular and linguistically erroneous neologism of Fionn. There's no definitive answers as to whether the events and characters depicted in these cycles have a meaningful relationship with reality. Some see them as entirely fictitious, man-made stories in the vein of Homer's Odyssey and Iliad, while many see them as analogues for, that is, inspired by, real events. For example, we know that Fionn himself, as presented in the Ossianic cycle, existed long before there were any Vikings in Scotland to fight off, but it was probably conceived of in a time when there most certainly were. This latter, or mytho-historical view, is probably the most likely. Some scholars, influenced by James Macpherson's epic poem The Songs of Ossian, identify the Féinn as the Picts, the antecedents of the Gaels and the Scots, but these ideas are problematic, not least because they are contradictory to the enormous amount of Irish mythology that suggests otherwise. Some theories even claim that there really was an Irish king in the 3rd century of the Common Era called Fionn, who had a troop of formidable warriors, but there's no evidence whatsoever that such a king or his warriors ever actually existed in any written record. It's fair to say that in his poetry, Macpherson's view of Irish-Scottish history is a romanticised fiction in the vein of later writers such as Sir Walter Scott and Robert Louis Stevenson, that is, to be taken with not just a grain, but a whole handful of salt. According to the Ossianic cycle, Fionn MacCumhaill, leader of the Féinn, the race of giants who defended Ireland against its enemies, both terrestrial and supernatural, was the son of Cumhaill, Now there's a nickname and a half. The first chief of the Féinn. Fionn MacCumhaill was the father of Ossian, and it was Ossian who immortalised his father's deeds in his epic poetry. Fionn, meaning fair as in good looking, appears to have been the third leader of the Fianna after his father, and Goll of Morna, his father's main rival, before the aforementioned unification into the Fianna Eireann. In the Ossianic cycle, Fionn MacCumhaill acquired his legendary general knowledge in particularly bizarre fashion. One must first accept that in a pool somewhere in Ireland or Scotland there lived a creature called the Salmon of Wisdom. No, I'm not making this up. Fionn used his newfound omniscience to great effect, outwitting his foes with his knowledge of future events, driving the Vikings from the land of the Gaeltacht. Those who've seen Fallen Kingdom will know that the man who really drove off the Vikings from Scotland was Sumole MacGillibreach, but we won't let that get in the way of a good story. Indeed, there are distinctions to be made between mythology and folk tales, mainly that mythology makes some reference or analogy to historical events, or at the very least forms a definitive narrative, while folk tales were told mainly for entertainment purposes, i.e. to entertain the children, or performed by revellers at the ceilidh, with fantastical imagination that may or may not have been influenced by the actual mythology, or far more likely, alcohol. One of these tales portrays Fionn as an Irish giant, and the creation of the Giant's Causeway is attributed to a battle between Fionn and a rival Scottish giant, Benandonor. Recent footage from this location shows what appears to be a giant entering a door in a cliff face.
We have some incredible breaking news for you today. There have been unconfirmed reports that the giant Fionn MacCumhaill has gone into winter hibernation. Now, earlier today, one second. Oh, well, this is exciting. Earlier today, we're being told tourists and National Trust rangers saw the legendary Fionn disappear into a magical doorway within the rock face here at the Giant's Causeway. Right, I believe we have some footage that has been taken on a mobile phone. Let's have a look at it.
Look, look. Anybody from along this part of the coast knows that through the summertime you'll regularly see Fionn MacCumhaill somewhere along the Giant's Causeway, but through the winter time, of course, he's hibernating. Sure, don't all mythological creatures hibernate through the winter? Sure, you'd never even see a leprechaun here in winter time.
Seems legit. The Isle of Man and Loch Ness are also attributed to Fionn's fights with his Scottish opponent as he scooped up dirt, forming the crater for Ireland's largest lake, and throwing it at Benandonor, apparently missing, and landing in the sea, forming the Isle of Man. The following are a selection of stories taken from the original Gaelic tome The Boyhood Deeds of Fionn and James Macpherson's aforementioned The Songs of Ossian. So sit back, suspend your disbelief, and enjoy a couple of the most prominent stories from this pantheon of legends. Cumhaill was the chief of the Féinn. In a battle between the Féinn and the powerful clan Mora, Cumhaill was killed, and Goll, the one-eyed leader of the Morna, became chief of both clans. Cumhaill's wife had just given birth to a son, and knowing Goll would be merciless towards his vanquished foe's newborn, she hid the child away to be raised in secret. His guardians named the fair-haired boy Fionn, and as he grew, he flourished and became straight, tall and fearless. As Fionn grew in stature, his deeds were spoken of with awe. He was as fleet as a deer, and deadly accurate with the sling. Word came to Goll of this young man's exploits, and the chief realised that this must be Cumhall's son. He ordered that Fionn be hunted down and killed. His guardians, hearing of the danger, dyed Fionn's hair black and gave him the name Diemna, bidding him to flee for his own safety. And so Diemna travelled far and wide, and wherever he took service, he would learn the ways of battle. As his strength grew, he was able to wrestle any man to the ground. But in Diemna's heart, he longed to learn the lessons of wisdom and to search for the beauty of song and music. One day, he came by a river and found a simple hut where a hermit named Finnegas lived. Young Diemna asked the old hermit if he might stay a while and serve him. Finnegas agreed, but told him nothing of his own reasons for being there. The hermit had dwelt by the river for many years and fished in the river daily, in the hope of catching the salmon of great wisdom that was said to live within the pool. For years, this fish had eaten nuts that had fallen in the water from the overhanging hazel trees. It was believed these nuts had given the salmon great knowledge and discerning ability, and when a man named Féinn caught and ate of this fish, it was said that the wisdom would be passed on to him. On the third day after Diemna's arrival, Finnegas felt a tug on his line. As he hauled in the salmon, he knew that this must be the legendary fish at last. Delighted, he asked Diemna to prepare and cook the fish, but not to taste of it before the hermit. The young man obediently did as he was asked, and set about preparations. When the salmon was cooked, it smelled wonderful. However, Diemna, seeing a blister on the skin of the fish, pressed it with his thumb. The blister burst and burnt him, and without thinking, he whisked his thumb up to cool it against his front tooth. Immediately, Diemna felt a strange sensation course through his whole being. He felt clearer and more aware of all that was around him. Giving his head a shake, he presented the cooked salmon to his master. Finnegas looked at him with piercing eyes. "You did not eat of the fish, did you?" "No, sir," Diemna said hurriedly, "but I burnt my thumb and gave it a sook." Finnegas sighed, then smiled and shook his head. "Your name isn't Diemna, is it?" The young man looked at the hermit. "No, sir, it is Féinn." He quickly explained the reason for changing his name. The hermit nodded and suddenly burst out laughing. "You have no idea what you've done, do you?" Féinn shook his head, puzzled. Finnegas explained about the salmon of wisdom, and light dawned on Finn's face. Now he knew why he felt so clear-minded. From that day on, whenever Féinn wished to know anything, all he had to do was press his thumb to his tooth, which made him a popular teammate in the pub quiz. The moral of the story? If you see a particularly intelligent-looking salmon, get it caught and eaten, and save yourself money on university tuition fees. Later, presumably in the autumn years of his boyhood, Féinn journeyed to the capital of Tara, where the locals were being terrorised by a deranged pyromaniac called Eireann the Burner, one of the feared Tuatha de Danann from the otherworld. Every Samhain, Eireann would appear and set the hill and the town ablaze with his fiery breath. Gaul and the Fianna could not stop Eireann wreaking his yearly havoc because he would play a magical tune that put everyone to sleep. That old chestnut. Féinn, however, outwitted the fire breather in a typically heroic and selfless fashion, imbibing a drop of poison from the tip of his spear, which, presumably amongst other symptoms, kept him awake during Eireann's soporific serenade. Féinn then made short work of Eireann and, revealing his identity to the king, was duly made leader of the Fianna, displacing the dastardly Gaul of Morna, who henceforth declared a truce with the MacCumhaills. Féinn and his men were returning from a day's hunting when they startled a wild doe. Fleet of foot it ran away, with men and hounds in hot pursuit. Féinn and his two dogs soon left the others far behind, but even he was growing breathless when the bonny deer disappeared over a small hill with the dogs, Bran and Skirlin, giving chase. When Fionn reached the top, he halted in astonishment. Below him, the doe was lying on the grass with both dogs gambling around her, licking her nose and ears as if they were pups. Fionn smiled and shook his head in wonder. This was a deer that no man should kill. That very night, as Fionn lay sleeping, he felt movement in his bed, and there, lying beside him, was a beautiful young woman. She thanked Fionn for saving her, and explained that she had been the doe. The woman explained that her name was Scythe, and 3 years previously, an evil magician had put her under an enchantment. Fionn, in his mercy, had rescued her, and now she was free. The two found love in each other's arms, and from that day, Fionn did not leave his Scythe's side. But one day, word came that an enemy approached, and although Scythe pleaded for Fionn to stay, he had to lead the Fianna in battle. He returned in triumph 7 days later, only to find that his lovely lady had disappeared, and not one of the people had been able to save her. He demanded to know where his beloved had gone. With great sorrow, they explained that while he was away, Scythe had watched for his return each day. One morning, she had heard the sound of a hunting horn, and with great joy had looked out and seen the figure of a warrior approaching with 2 dogs at his side. Overjoyed to see what she thought was her beloved once more, Scythe had run out to meet him, with the joyful news that she was expecting their first child. But when she got closer, Scythe gave a cry of fear and anguish. This figure was not Fionn, but none other than the evil magician in disguise who had turned her into a deer previously. Swiftly, he smote her 3 times with his rod of yew, and immediately Scythe became a deer once more. The 2 dogs changed and became fierce, bloodthirsty hounds who gave chase to the fleeing doe. People streamed out of the fort to rescue Scythe, but it was too late. The enchanter, the dogs and the deer all vanished into the mist. Hearing this, Fionn was broken-hearted, and though he continued to lead his Fianna, he searched for his beloved wherever he could. After 7 years, he gave up hope and gradually returned to hunting with his men. One warm summer's day while out hunting, the men heard their hounds baying in the forest ahead, as if they had cornered some great beast. But when the men approached, they saw no sign of danger. There was just a wild young boy standing naked and bewildered underneath a great tree. The dogs were called off, but Fionn's hounds, Bran and Skirlin, remained. They gently lay down by the child and fondly licked the boy's arms and face as if he was familiar to them. The child returned with the hunters, but he had no speech. Soon he began to learn language, and before long he was able to recount his tale. From his earliest memory, his only companion had been a white doe who had loved him and shown him how to find food. They had lived simply in a cave where he had been content. But now and again a dark, cruel man would come to their cave, and the boy and the deer were very frightened of his power. One day, this evil man came and spoke threateningly to the doe. He smote her harshly on the back with his rod of yew and forced her to follow him. She had turned and looked at the boy with eyes that held great sorrow. She did not want to leave him. The boy had tried to follow, but found that he had been immobilized. The next thing he knew, he was waking up to the sound of dogs baying around him. Fionn had no doubt that this boy was his own son, and he loved him dearly. He named him Oisin, meaning little fawn, and whenever he looked upon his son's features, he was reminded of his beautiful wife Scythe. Oisin grew to be a brave warrior like his father, but his greatest gift was in crafting words. Poetry, stories and songs seemed to flow from him, painting pictures of beauty, war, women and great deeds. The Fianna fought many battles, Oisin as well as any. But one evening as the men were camped around the fire, weary from combat, they heard the sound of hooves approaching. A tall white horse appeared through the wood, and upon it sat an upright figure. Her hair gleamed gold in the firelight. She was dressed in white, and even in the darkness all eyes saw her beauty. Silently, every man respectfully rose, and Fionn stepped forward and bowed low. The royal maiden came forward and halted her horse before Fionn. "I have found you, Fionn MacCumhaill," she said in a clear, lovely voice. "My name is Niamh, and I come from the land of Fianna. From afar I have heard tell of your son Ossian, a gentle, brave man who speaks words of silver and sings with a voice of gold." She then turned and her eyes searched for the tall young warrior in the firelight. When her gaze alighted on Ossian, she beckoned to him and he walked forward. He couldn't take his eyes from her beautiful features. In her quiet, seductive voice, Niamh told Ossian of her homeland where no sorrow was known, nor did any man grow weary and old, but rather more vigorous and youthful. She asked Ossian to return with her to the land of the forever young and be her husband. Ossian could not and did not want to refuse. As Niamh had spoken, his heart and his mind were filled with a love for the queenly lady. Willingly he climbed onto the back of her horse, placed his arms around her waist and went with her. Over sea, through storm and waves they rode. They came to a place of beauty and tranquility, where care and age fell away from Ossian, as if he had just discarded his old clothes. Their wedding feast lasted no less than 10 days and nights. Ossian and Niamh were deeply in love, and over time she bore him 3 children. Ossian was a good husband and father, yet at times his wife would see a faraway look in his eye. One day she asked him if he was content, and Ossian smiled and answered that he was very happy, yet he desired to look upon his land once more and smell the earth of home. Distraught, Niamh begged him not to leave her, but when she saw that he was determined, she reluctantly agreed to let him go. However, she warned her husband that many years had passed in the land of his birth, and that nothing would be as he remembered it. Niamh also ominously instructed Ossian that if he wished to return to her, then he must on no account ever dismount from his horse, or he would, quote, regret his actions. Bit passive-aggressive. Ossian bid farewell to his loving family and rode upon the white horse over the seas to the shores of his homeland. To his dismay, he found no trace of his father or any of the Fianna, and when he questioned a passer-by, the man looked at him strangely and frowned. He said that he recalled his father speaking about the heroes of old from ancient times, but it was only a distant memory. Greatly disturbed by this, Ossian rode on to the fort where the Fianna had lived, but little remained. Only weeds and brambles grew over the crumbling ruins. Tears of grief fell down Ossian's cheeks as he thought of all that he had lost. Now he bitterly regretted ever leaving his dear Niamh and their children. However, as he pulled on the horse's reins to turn and leave back for Fianna, his eye caught sight of a water trough filled with rainwater, and suddenly he smiled. This was where he and the Fianna used to wash their hands. On impulse, he eagerly dismounted to use the trough one last time, but as his feet touched the grass, he collapsed and all strength disappeared from his body. Age and decrepitude suddenly took their toll upon Ossian's frame. He was so weak that he could do nothing. Too late he remembered Niamh's warning, and dismayed, he watched as the white horse turned, galloped from the glade and vanished. He tried to cry out for his comrades, but his voice was cracked and reedy. He lay there for a long time, broken, sorrowful and dried out. But Ossian was not yet finished. He found a hazel branch and with difficulty raised himself up and feebly shuffled out from the forest. Some peasants found the frail, bent and white-haired giant and took him to the home of a nearby priest. The priest was called Patrick, yep, it's more than likely that one, and he treated Ossian kindly, listening to his tales of old. The aged man spoke sadly and eloquently of times long past, the hunting and the thrill of the chase, the camaraderie of the Fianna, the wonder of spring buds and birdsong, and the joy and companionship of women. In the years that remained to Ossian, it is said that the priest tried to persuade the man to, quote, take the faith, which we hope wasn't a euphemism, but Ossian stubbornly refused. To his very last breath, Ossian's whispers were of those he loved, of the Fianna, of Niamh, and of his children. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the show, hitting like and subscribe really helps the channel to grow and allows us to present more free content like this for you to enjoy. We'll see you next time, and until then, enjoy your adventures.